So Windup Watch Fair New York actually just happened, and in typical Brandon fashion, that means that it is time to recap Windup Watch Fair Chicago, because all these watches and I'm just never on time. Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. This is the Minute Marker. My name is Brandon Paul. Welcome to part one of the Windup Watch Fair roundup that I am doing of the watches that really stood out to me from Windup Watch Fair Chicago. It seems like it was a lot smaller than the New York fair that just happened, which means that I unfortunately missed out on being able to see some of the brands that I've been more curious about as of late. That said, there was plenty to see in Chicago, and I have a whole bunch of pictures and wrist rolls to share with you if you would like. If you're interested, sit tight and let's get through my big winners of Windup Watch Fair Chicago. So I've got friends who have been collecting watches for way longer than I have. At the point that they're at in their collections, they seem to be veering more towards watches by a lot of independent brands. Stuff where you know the name of the guy who's making the watch. And I absolutely love that, the ability to connect with the item on that other level of just knowing the craftsperson behind it. But I feel like that's something that is definitely a luxury and can be ridiculously expensive. Even today, I'm sure the biggest brands that very much cash in on that name recognition of their founder tend to have multiple watchmakers who are pumping out those watches. For example, I don't think Max Busser is making 350 watches by himself annually. I mean, if he is, that's pretty fucking awesome, and somebody should let me know down in the comments, because I would love to be wrong about that. But I think that what happens when people resonate with a face behind the company is there is a sense of attunement to the vision behind the brand image and what the items themselves are presenting as the lifestyle and the, I hate to say image again, but the image that's being sold to the customer. People talk about how a reason to support these smaller indie brands is that you get to know the people behind the creations. The people whose brainchild has come up with the company, the brand image, the designs of the watches themselves. Windup Watch Fair was somewhere that I felt this for the very first time. And to be completely frank, I think I felt it strongest when meeting the couple behind Laurier. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I feel like someone's going to freak out in the comments, but I'm also definitely going to pronounce this like 5 different ways throughout this video. So I got to meet Lorenzo and Lauren. If I got those names wrong, I'm so sorry. I am great with faces, awful with names. But Lorenzo's outfit on the day was amazing. Just peak menswear, just a very nice pair of tailored slacks, jacket, and pretty sure a blue button-up shirt. But what caught my attention was on his wrist he had on the new Laurier Falcon. This watch has been haunting my dreams ever since Windup. I desperately wanted to get one. I still kind of do. I might end up putting in a pre-order, but I frankly just should not be doing anything because I have no money. But that's how good this watch is. It just pulls you in. There's something so charming about it. I am hesitant to call it an homage to the Rolex 1016 because I think that would be unfair to this watch. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think the main similarities are really just that it's a stainless steel sports watch with a 369 dial. The watch has a character all its own, from the case finishing and profile to the bulbous domed Hesalite crystal and the absolutely classic dimension, 36 millimeters in diameter, 9 millimeters thick, with an additional 2 millimeters for the domed glass, and a 44 millimeter lug to lug with 20 millimeter lug width. I turned up to the fair wearing my Black Bay 36 S&G, and It has almost the exact same dimensions as the Falcon, except for the thickness, which I believe is around 10.2, 10.25. But there is something extremely different about the way the Laurier wears. It feels very vintage in its aesthetic and the warmth that it kind of emanates. But it doesn't have that jangliness that you would expect from a vintage bracelet. It doesn't have any of that hollowness or the rattliness. Honestly, for $500, it felt pretty quality. I'm sure something that got me on a subconscious level was the broad arrow hand on the hour, just because I'm used to the broad arrow hands on my Aquaterra. But man, oh man, this watch is an absolute banger, in my opinion. It has a 3-link oyster-style bracelet with a waffle textured dial, with the 3, 6, and 9 at the cardinal positions, triangle, an inverted triangle at the 12-hour marker, and I don't even know what you would call the other hour markers. They're just kind of like sticks with points. They look almost like those little post-its that you would use to point out things in like your textbooks. Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I just a nerd? The watch has a big ass crown, and it is one of my favorite things about it. I don't know why, I just kind of like really enjoy big crowns. It makes winding the watch a much more enjoyable experience, but I really think it kind of balances out the way that the watch wears on the wrist. It has a Miyota 9 series movement inside, 100 meters or 330 feet of water resistance. Something I appreciate was that Laurier, just like Rolex, is very much about the iterative evolution of their products. One of the things that they really showcase between this and the prior version was the fact that they decided to slim down the bracelet, which makes it wear very differently. And I think that that type of attention to detail is what helps these watches really stand out at that price point. And that looking at the little details is what takes us into the next watch, which is also from Laurier, but it is their dive watch, the Neptune. So something that was pretty cool was this being kind of like a trade show for them. Most of the watches that they had there were pre-production pieces. They were one-of-one prototypes, so I was trying my best to be delicate, but also it was nice to see them with just kind of a little bit of wear. And I think that's where they shine in like getting beat up a bit. That was what I had initially picked up my Black Bay 58 for. That watch has now left my collection. And I desperately miss having one of those gilt dial dive watches. When I saw the Neptune, I fell in love just a little bit because it very much has that kind of character. It's 39 mils in diameter. It's got a 10.3 millimeter case thickness with a 2.5 millimeter dome tessellite crystal, and they've shortened the lug to lug to 46 millimeters, which honestly the lug to lug was kind of my only gripe with the Black Bay 58 other than its heft, but that has more to do with me than the watch. I think what I really wanted to point out with this watch, beyond obviously the general aesthetic and beauty that it has, is that they really do think about the little details. What you'll see here is that for the model with a date window, they placed it at 6, and they've used a roulette date wheel that alternates black and red dates. In order to match the red date, they've also added red text to the dial. The text just reads Neptune, the name of the watch itself. On the no date model, because there's no red from a date window to add that little pop of color, instead they've changed the Neptune text to gold to match the rest of the gilt dial. It may seem silly, but at least to me, it's those little things that tell me that Lauren and Lorenzo really do care about what they're doing. They're passionate about the design of these watches, and they're passionate about the way in which their brand is going. They were also just really nice, and I feel like that makes me want one of their watches even more. Next up, and lastly, at least from Laurier, is the Laurier Zephyr. This was a very cool watch. It is something that, at least in my opinion, is something more unique to the market, especially at this price range. But it is a 31 millimeter tonneau shaped, very slender watch that is meant to be reminiscent of 20th century Art Deco architecture. The case is 8 millimeters thick. The watch has a 42 millimeter lug to lug and has a 18 millimeter lug width. I think really what stands out here is the case itself and the dial. It looks like it's a stamped guilloche. Something that also stands out to me on these watches are the hands. They're beautiful, little kind of folded Dauphine hands. They're heat blued for the silvery white dial version. It's regular steel on the new Crimson version, which I unfortunately didn't get hands on time with. It was announced, I want to say, a couple months after the event. But to clarify, none of these are out yet. They're all still on pre-order. They're all scheduled for release later on this year. Knowing how long it might take me to get this video out, that may not be true anymore. But yeah, I just think these are really cool watches. If you're someone who's into dress watches and prefers a tonneau case and just generally shaped cases, this is probably something that might interest you. Next up is a brand that I have been very curious about for a very long time because they are a Chicago-based brand. I am Chicago-based, so I just kind of want one of their watches. But honestly, looking at a lot of the styles that they do, I've never really felt like there were too many that resonated with me and my aesthetic, the things that I like, until for Windup Watch Fair Chicago 2022, they dropped a limited edition, I think of just 50 pieces, of a Oak and Oscar Humboldt, with a brass dial and bezel, and oh my god, it is amazing. It's just so cool. It very much has that like yellow gold vibe going on. I had my like I said, I had my Black Babe 36 with me, and holding them next to each other, it felt like a match made in heaven. They would have been a great pair. Unfortunately, as you can see, it seems a little bit too big for my wrist. I'm not sure. I might be able to pull it off. But I think maybe the Humboldt might just not be the right model for me. Now, if you're looking at this and saying, Brandon, I can't see anything. The photo's really blurry. I am so sorry. I can't see anything either. This has to be the most difficult watch I've ever had to photograph. I don't know what it is, but the kind of like radial light that was happening with the dial from the center was just throwing off my camera's focus completely. But it's sick. It's so good. As you can see, it's a sandwich style dial, so there's superluminova below those cutouts for the numerals and our markers. Yeah, I don't know much else to say about this watch. I just absolutely loved it when I saw it. Apparently it's sold out on the very first day of the fair. As soon as the doors opened, there was a line for this watch. So that tracks. Maybe next time, Oak and Oscar. Going from one very cool handmade dial to another, we are now moving to Anordain. They're a small watchmaker out of Glasgow, and what they specialize in is enamel dial work. Enamel is something that is very difficult to really capture the character of on camera, whether that's photo or video. There's a depth to it that doesn't really come through. If you look up more videos on their watches, something that you're going to hear constantly is that their dials have to be seen in person to be understood. And having seen these, especially the stuff that they do for their Fume dials, I completely understand. It's pretty amazing. There is a glassy characteristic that just gets almost compressed and flattened when you try and take a photo of it. So I have to say that in terms of the dials, it was the Model 1 Fumes that really stood out to me. I fell in love with them as soon as they were announced and the photos came out. But that said, something that really shocked me about Anordain's watches was that their cases are also really interesting. They're very unique. It's not just putting in so much work into their dials. I wouldn't have been surprised if they just kind of like picked out a case out of a catalog and then tossed that dial in. But these are cases that, at least from what I can see, are very much Anordain. They don't necessarily look like anyone else, and I feel like that speaks a lot to the kind of holistic way in which, even though they specialize in their enamel work, they're looking at their watches in a very holistic way. This white dial Model 2 to me was absolutely stunning. Again, I believe this is 36 millimeters. Very much a Goldilocks size for me. It wears almost like a field watch. It feels a little beefier than it actually is, and I think that that's something really nice that almost plays against the very delicate and kind of precious nature of the enamel dial. I don't know how much of a beating these watches can take, but they certainly felt like they could take some. I'm not saying you would want to. I'm just saying that it's nice should anything ever happen. God forbid. So trying to stay in the UK, we go from Scotland to England and look at Christopher Ward. Those of you on YouTube probably don't know this, but I used to have a Christopher Ward for a hot second. It was the worn and wound C65 Sandstorm Blackout. Extremely cool watch. I unfortunately had to return it to put funds towards something else, and I'm very sad about it. But alas. So something that instantly caught my eye when I was at the Christopher Ward table was the C65 Sandhurst, which is the watch that the Sandstorm was based on. It's 38 millimeters. I'm pretty sure it's around 44 lug to lug. But what fascinates me about this watch is its case design. Christopher Ward calls this their light catcher case. It's basically a whole bunch of cuts and facets that basically work to slim down the case on your wrist. It's really cool. It's reminds me case finishing that and complexity that I don't think you get on a lot of watches at this price point. But this watch sadly is now out of production. They have an updated Sandhurst 2, which to my eyes it seems like the only updates are the hands. But you can go check that out on the website if you're interested. Two of the other Christopher Wards that really stood out to me were the C1 Moonglow. This is a fascinating watch. It is, I feel like the moon phase is probably the most useless but the most stunning visual complication, at least personally. And I think this one does it really well. The moons and stars here are done with luminous material. It's a pointer date. Overall, this watch is just very cool, very stylish, and very unique. As you can see from these photos, it's way too big for me personally, but if I had the wristband to pull it off, it would definitely be on my list for sure. And the last Christopher Ward that we will be talking about is the C65 Aquatine? Aquatine. Yeah, I don't know. We're just gonna move on. This dive watch has big Blanc Pond 50 Fathoms vibes. It has a beautiful curved sapphire bezel that to me is a little reminiscent of vintage Bakelite bezels, and just it's a depth to a bezel that I'm unfamiliar with seeing. So I just thought it was really cool, and it's something that caught my eye for its uniqueness. Something that also surprised me about this watch was the fact that for a 41mm watch, it does not look awful on my wrist. It's got a lug-to-lug of 46.8, which is just under the 47 that I believe my Black Bay 58 was, and yet they seem to have pulled off some magic that makes it look damn good on my wrist. At least I think so. You can let me know if you disagree in the comments. Please be nice, I'm fragile. But yeah, I think if you're someone who's really tired of the typical Rolex sub homage or like dive watches in that vein, this would be a very interesting route to go down. The watches come in some very fun colors that are a lot brighter than you would expect from your typical dive watch. So I think it's worth checking out. Another UK watch brand, Fair, is a company whose website I have spent a lot of time perusing. They do a lot of very cool watches in very interesting color schemes at not outrageous prices, I don't think. But obviously being a UK brand, I never got to get my hands on them and try them out. And I'm very hesitant to spend money on something that I have not seen in person, especially when it comes to purchases of this size, which is kind of what these shows and these types of trade shows and watch shows and stuff are great for, is for you to have some time to just play around with these things and see if like any of them really resonate with you. Looking at Fair's table, there was this strange sense of just downright fascination. They had a lot of cool stuff to show. One of them, for example, is this pilot's watch, which has lume on the bottom and sides of the numerals, which just leads to this stunning effect when lit up. That said, the watch in general was pretty cool. It has a soft iron inner cage to help with anti-magnetism. It's kind of a chunky boy, and it's a big watch, but as you can see, the lugs are extremely short, so it really helps with wearability. And overall, it was just a fascinating piece that was very different to a lot of what was on offer. And you can see it's next to another variation of this watch that has a completely different dial. So I hope this gives you an idea of the way in which Fair not only changes just the color palette of their watches, but also completely changes up the dial architecture and just the general vibe to create completely different plays on the silhouettes that they work with. Something fun about Fair is also that these different color and style variations of the same model have completely different names, and I think that very much speaks to the fact that they're really trying to differentiate these two pieces as not being similar beyond being from the same model family. The white dial with the lume on the side of the numerals is called the Bradfield, while the black dial that was next to it is the Morgan. As you can see, the amount of variation that they have in the colors of their dials, of their straps, it seems like there's something for everybody. And the unfortunate case was that the watch that I feel like was definitely for me was a limited edition that had long since sold out. The watch that I felt like really spoke to me was a part of their latest three-hander collection. It's a piece called the Discovery. It has what they call a vertical brushed purple sunray finish. The dial is magnificent. When I had first seen the watch, it almost showed up as near black. It was very much like a blood red, and shifting it around in the light, you can see it takes on multiple tones from crimson to purple to almost like from crimson to purple to almost like a cherry red. It was an absolutely lovely dial, and overall the watch as a whole just felt really quality. The watch overall felt great on the wrist. I feel like something that Fair really excels at is that they make some of these mid-sized bigger watches. This one comes in at 39.5, but they keep the lugs really short, which keeps it wearable for a much larger percentage of people. This one has a lug-to-lug of 45mm. Which is why, as you can see, it wears pretty well on my wrist. It's also only got a thickness of 10.8, and that definitely helps. In fact, I had initially thought that I would have preferred if the watches were a tad bit slimmer, but I think that the balance of the proportions helps it wear on the wrist in a very nice way for an everyday type of watch, which is my assumption that that would be what they're pitching the damn pitching these at, because I do not think they're dress watches. Now, I know that when I speak about the quality, you might be rolling your eyes because I've mentioned that a lot when talking about a bunch of different brands. But trust me when I tell you that for the $1,000 to maybe $1,500, $2,000 price point, these were probably the... Oh my god. But trust me when I tell you that for the sub $1,000 price point, these were probably the best feeling watches at the show. And I feel like that says a lot when you consider all the competition. But that is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I know it's been ages since I've uploaded, but I'm going to try and make more of an effort. I'm still chronically ill and disabled, so it is what it is. That's why things take so long. That said, it means the world to me that you stayed throughout this entire video. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have something to say, comment. I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being you. If you want to see part 2 of this video, you can click here, somewhere. If you like this video, you can also check out one of my other videos that should be popping up on screen right about now. Which should be popping up on screen right about now.